السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, and good afternoon to everybody else. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الكريم صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. I would like to welcome everybody else who has joined us today. Our discussion today really is about social cohesion. Hopefully we have about 2 hours to do all of the work, and so just 1 minute. Let me just try and reorientate myself here. Yeah, all right. So really we have between now and 2 o'clock, and we'll try and quickly to get the work done in that short period as possible. Certainly this matter is not an easy matter. It has its own historical background as to what worked and what didn't work over the past few hundred years. In a little way, we are trying to find a way to position ourselves as MUSA in such a way that we can be able to find solutions if possible, or a way forward for ourselves as a people. And in this instance, we're speaking as Muslims within a broad society of non-Muslims. As you know, Muslims comprise really just about 1.5 to 2.2% of the population of South Africa, and play very significant roles across the board. And so we thought that with the formation of MUSA, maybe that role that Muslims have been playing can be augmented and grown. Information about MUSA has been shared with the panelists, and this includes the MUSA Charter, mission statement, vision statement, core values, how MUSA will undertake its mission, and the MUSA Vision 2040 and its strategic goals. I believe these documents were sufficient, or are sufficient enough, to orientate and also help our panelists, who include our 2 guests, Angelo Fick and Tahir Sitoto, including our MUSA colleague Amira Fakudi. They will hopefully take us through this journey of social cohesion in our country. I hope I've got with me as people who will assist me with this program. As you know, this is a virtual meeting, and so we're using an app, and we really need each other in this instance. So we've got Iqbal Kolia. I hope he's there to assist us.
I'm here.
And Akila as well. Oh, mashallah, yes. I will ask somebody to look. I don't have, for some reason here, I don't find my agenda for today. So if somebody can just put it up for me, and then we can then talk about it, talk around it. Yusuf, if it's possible, is it possible?
It's done.
All right. Let's go right. Yes. So
can I just
yes.
Tahir has come on. Maybe we can just get him on board before you carry on.
All right.
Please welcome him, please, Malik.
Dr. Tahir Sitoto, I hope you can hear me.
And then we can welcome the panelists thereafter.
Yeah, I hope he's not responding. I hope he hears me.
All right, he's getting organized. You can start. Maybe I said Tahir, but I meant the panelists.
All right. I will introduce to us Angelo Fick, who's going to be speaking to us about social cohesion in context of socio-economic justice in South Africa. He will be followed by Amina Fakudi, who will talk to us about social cohesion at family and community level. And then later on, Tahir Sitoto will then follow up with social cohesion in the South African context of new emerging Muslims. And the program really is that as well. After they have spoken, we will then have questions from the chair, and we then open it up to discussions and then a closure. May I, without further ado, ask our first speaker, Angelo Fick, to grace us with his wisdom. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum to everybody.
Alaikum salam.
So I think will give a slightly askew presentation to the concept of social cohesion. And I'm agitating for a shift from the idea of social cohesion to the idea of social solidarity by outlining what the shortcomings of social cohesion would be for South Africa. So I think there's been a lot of talk in South Africa about social cohesion that continues on from the talk that we had for almost 15 to 20 years about a new nation after 1994, which at first was considered to be a rainbow nation, and then afterwards was considered to be, in this moment, is considered to be part of a new dawn that we will be experiencing. My concern around cohesion or social cohesion is that it implies a coming together and a kind of sticking together, which can so easily suture over the cracks that are merely signs of the deep-seated problems of a society as divided as ours. And here I think it is important for us to remember Bessie Head's kind of diagnosis of what South Africa was for much of the 20th century. She called it a country of so many signs and divisions that you ended up with no people at all. And I think while we have taken some of the signs down in post-apartheid South Africa, we haven't really taken apart the divisions that those signs kind of indicated. So what we ended up is a country where all the signs of apartheid and colonialism were, well, not all of them, but many of them were removed. But the divisions that they indicated weren't at all removed. And in some cases, those divisions were made worse. So if you want cohesion, if you want social, a social compact, what you need is a social contract. And in South Africa, for many, the social contract is based on, one, religious and faith-based beliefs, but in the public space, also around the constitution. And I'll come back to what the constitution means in relation to ideas of cohesion and solidarity about 5 minutes from now. But I think it's important for us to go back to the 1990s briefly, just in our heads, and imagine what it would be like to build a social compact that would lead to cohesion, or in my case, solidarity. The social contract would be the basic values on which we can all agree that we should proceed in our interactions with one another. And here I don't want to go into too much detail about Jean-Jacques Rousseau's idea of the social contract, but we must all agree that some values are ones that we share and that they are the base values. And one of those should be mutual respect. I mean, the golden rule that goes back 3,000 years, the idea that you don't do unto others what you don't want done to yourself. And I think in faith-based approaches and in deep-seated faith belief systems, as well as in the public domain that is secular, that's a golden rule that does imply a kind of social contract that we can adhere to. But there's one thing to have words, whether they're the words of the Constitution, the words that we recite as believers, or the words that we use to articulate our aspirations for being together. And then there are our actions. And in South Africa for 25 years of the post-apartheid, 26 now, but the post-apartheid period, we have used the words to imply that the actions are actually happening. So we've used the words of the Freedom Charter, and I don't just mean political parties, I mean all of us in our various ways as individuals, as communities, as organizations, the words of our faith-based belief, the words of the Constitution. We've used these words to remind ourselves of what this country could be, of what life between ourselves could be. But often our actions have contradicted those words because we didn't arrive in 2020 by accident. The world we live in, the country we live in, the societies of divisions, of deprivation, of lack, of poor skill, of corruption, of economic malfeasance, of pay inequality, of wealth inequality, is not a world that happened by accident over 25 years. That world was built in everyday interactions. some of those interactions were letting politicians get away with certain things, but it's also about building our own lives and continuing the old patterns of privilege and advantage that we inherited from the previous dispensation, whether those patterns were racialized, or whether they were classed, or whether they were in terms of geography. Pay equality, for example, in South Africa didn't happen because of government dictate. It happened because ordinary people who run businesses, who make decisions, decided to pay them what they did. And so when we talk about building a social compact, a social contract, sorry, I'm just getting feedback interference.
Okay, I've muted them all. Thank you. Sorry about that. You may proceed. They're all muted.
Okay. So what I want us to begin to think through is how we are a country built on words, the words of the Constitution. We are people built on words, the words of our religious faith, beliefs, and professions that are performed by us on a regular basis. But we're also, living in a world and living as individuals and as communities through our actions, which often speak louder than our words. And so if we want to build a social contract, I'd like us to go back and think about those terms, liberty, equality, and fraternity. A social compact or contract requires fraternity. And that means we must all be with one another in fully human ways. We can be different. We can have different faith-based beliefs. We can have different political beliefs, as long as those political beliefs are not about the dehumanization and extermination of others. But if we want liberty and true equality, it is not enough to have free and fair elections, to have free and fair expressions of opinions, if we don't have economic equality. Because without economic equality, freedom, as we've known over the last 26 years, can become a very empty concept for people. If we don't have economic equality, as well as political equality, freedom and liberty, longing for fraternity, longing for a social compact is a really sentimental idea. And it echoes some of the desires, aspirations expressed by people who were beneficiaries of apartheid in late apartheid, who wanted to be, nice and equal with the rest of us in terms of fraternity. They wanted us all to get along, but they weren't willing to give up some of the privileges that they had gained through the exploitation of the rest of us. And so here we must begin to think through words and actions and make our actions match our words. However earnest our sentimental desire for social cohesion, those desires will never see material consequences if they're not backed up by actions. And some of those actions include actually paying people a fair wage for their work, not maximizing our profits over the lives and livelihoods of people, thinking of working together rather than merely thinking charitably, asking what other people's views, experiences, understandings of the world may be before we project our own onto them, and also experiencing and exercising that most fundamental faith-based value of empathy, of trying to be in the shoes of other people, in their lives, in their skins, in their experiences, and listening to them in what they express, even if we know that what they express isn't necessarily matched by the reality, and then working through that problem. So I would propose that instead of social cohesion, where we all just get along together and stick together in relation to a common object, whether that object is an enemy object, a disease, racism, violence, death, whatever it is, or whether that object that we are standing against is, or standing together on, is a positive aspect, which is a basic human value. I'd like us to think of it as solidarity, which is to stand with others, not just to try and stand next to them, but to stand with them. So even if the struggle that they're standing for is not ours, it's important for us to be in that struggle in support of them. And here we have a long history of those kinds of struggles in post-apartheid South Africa. The struggle against hunger, the struggle against deprivation, the struggle against poor housing is not a struggle that came out of the COVID-19 crisis. That problem has been there, that struggle has been there by ordinary people every day for the last 26 to 27 years. And so those of us who sit in the middle classes may have to think of what kinds of acts of solidarity are required to further those people's aspirations for human dignity, for housing, for food, etc. Not just in this particular COVID crisis, but in perpetuity. that this particular moment in which we stand together should be, as Arundhati Roy, the Indian writer, says, a portal to a whole new world, to look at the world we live in, to look at how we made it, and to unmake it and make a different kind of world. And there, I think it is important for us to think with people with whom we may want fellowship, even if we don't share their belief systems, but also to have fellow feeling, you have to have fellow experience. And here I think acts of solidarity are crucial. If people in townships are going to be held, 8 people to a 2-room shack, and are expected not to be in the streets and not to be moving around under a lockdown, I think it is an act of social solidarity for those of us who do not live in townships to also not step outside. Whatever those reasons for stepping outside are, if they're not actually emergency reasons, it is to take the money that we would have spent on transportation and to invest it in some project where people who are poor and have lost their income will benefit from it. It is that when we buy food, to buy food not for ourselves, but to look around us at the people who also may need some of that food and to share it. And that kind of act of social solidarity isn't about being noble or being altruistic or being a do-gooder. It's about building a world in which we are all equally human and in which the differences of class and material access becomes the basis on which we unmake the very basis of that material inequality. Because if we want fellow feeling, we have to have fellow experience. And so that means that if, some of us have to be policed into our homes, others of us should remain in our homes without needing to be policed in order to begin to think of what does it mean to be inside your house and be unable to move about your streets without being harassed. And when that becomes uncomfortable, to begin to think of how to address that and how to make that differently for everybody. And then acts of solidarity go deeper than, I think, the veneers of cohesion, because we have the experience over the last 27 years of having believed that we are cohering, that we are together, that we have the same experience, despite the fact that millions of poor people in all of those, service delivery protests, in all of those community actions of the last 27 years, every day have told us our experience is not the same. And so when we think of difference, the differences can be doctrinal within one faith-based organization. They can be interfaith differences. They can be differences of class and region and language and education level. And to begin to think through those differences to what we share as human beings and how we can cut the pie differently so that those who have less of it can get more of it. And that means that those of us who have more of it will have to do less of it. And I know what the irony of that is, given what's behind me in a country with, kind of a lack of access to books, etc. But we need to begin to think very carefully about solidarity as not just a profession of words or a profession of faith and belief, but an action that we must perform on a daily basis if we are to undo the consequences of the economic injustice and inequality that we live among. It is no accident, and it isn't an act of nature, that income inequality and wealth inequality in South Africa is the widest in the world. That was made actively in post-apartheid South Africa. It is the consequence of issues that began in colonialism and apartheid South Africa, but it was also strengthened and reinforced in post-apartheid South Africa. So I would suggest we go beyond cohesion and move towards solidarity. And the social solidarity that I imagine is a solidarity in which we don't just look for commonality, in which we don't just imagine what is it like to be the other person, but in which we begin to respect difference and in which we begin to address the material difference, and not just with the words, but with the actions. And that may mean agitating people to pay a living wage, agitating people to share their wealth and not amass it for themselves, agitating people to share more than what they have in terms of also experiences of deprivation. Because I think it is in fellow experience, not just fellow feeling, that we can build not just political solidarity, but human solidarity while maintaining differerences of faith, differences of ideas, because those differences will then be founded in respect and in equality, not in inequality. And that, I think, for me, is a way in which we can begin to build strong foundations for a new experience that isn't built on maintaining inequality of all sorts of kinds while wanting sentimental fellow feeling with other people. And that's basically my presentation. I'll take questions later.
I would just say thank you so much, Angelo Fick, for that excellent discourse on social cohesion, and your proposal that rather than talk of social cohesion, we should be talking of solidarity and fellowship. And, you know, take us through the post-apartheid situation and how our actions have contradicted our words, and you define our words as a social contract determined by religion and the constitution. Clearly, your work over the years comes out there that, you know, your responsibilities as the director of research at ASTRIS is quite clear here. In the 2 decades you spent across the various disciplines in the humanities and applied sciences comes out clearly here. And so, you know, and we greatly appreciate that. We will reserve questions for later. Maybe we should now